I find it so funny that someone who says and bases this entire discussion on the patronizing statement, it doesn't matter when asked about the ethnicity of a historical character, teaches the ethnicity and race of historical characters. Hence, it only doesn't matter when you can't prove the ethnicity you want to push for political reasons. But it does matter very much when you are very able to push ideas and ideologies that you want to be presented to the public in order to get one against the other side. That's not academia. That's not university. That's not what students are paying for. What students are paying for is academic neutrality. The idea of keeping your own personal beliefs and your own personal politics, and which you're, of course, free to have whatever you want, out of the teaching, because clearly this person is letting her own hatred for the opposite side of the political spectrum, and I understand when it comes to the extremists, I understand that, but she's letting that poison her presentations. You were invited, Professor, to answer professionally a question that people ask. What I saw in your answer was extremely disappointing, and I can already imagine, and not trying to build a straw man, but do allow me this. I can already imagine a class with this professor, and a black student raises the hand and asks, "Excuse me, professor, but was Hannibal black?" And she would go into this whole massive route. She would like, okay, so black people had a lot of important positions of power and this and that, and discussing all the moving, but some of which is even true, because I do agree. I don't use the term sub-Saharan because I don't think it's correctly descriptive. But she would go into this massive diversion just to answer and validate the question of the black student. But if a white student asks the question, excuse me, professor, but was Hannibal Barca black? Her answer would be, it doesn't matter. Why do you ask? He's not your people. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So if you see this, Dr. Kennedy, I challenge you publicly. Prove it. Be professional when you present information about the ancient world, and be accurate in language usage, particularly when you talk about my people, meaning the Sicilians, and in general, classical antiquity and the classical period.
Obviously, we have the myth of Dido and the founding of Carthage from Phoenicia. Yeah. We also have Phoenix, the initiator of the Phoenicians in North Africa, or even in Ethiopia, right? If we read Heliodorus's novel from the 3rd or 4th century CE, we don't know the exact date. He's got they tell the myth of Andromeda in that. And Andromeda, and of course we have 5th century vases of this. It's Phoenix, who's the father of Andromeda, who they're white, or they're represented as Phoenician, as not black, but they're in a space that is filled with black people. So, but the crux of the story of Heliodorus is that the king and queen of Ethiopia are black, and they have a daughter though who comes out to have really white skin. I mean, she's called white because she's a woman, but she has really pale skin, and so the mother has to hide the birth of this child because she's afraid that...
I haven't got a clue what this has to do with Hannibal, but...
People will think that she had the child out of wedlock. But in fact, what happened is, and here you're going to get a little bit of insight into ancient medical theories. There is a medical theory called imprinting, where if in the act of sex you are staring at something, that image can imprint onto the fetus. It's something about how they understood how the eye worked, the nature of how the eye worked. And so in the story, this black Ethiopian king and queen of Ethiopia are procreating, and she stares at a painting on the wall of Andromeda. And so the pale skin of Andromeda imprints on the child. And the whole thing ends up happy. Everybody's fine. Look, mom and dad, it's really me. But in the meantime, she's kidnapped by pirates and raised by shepherds. And there's true love. It's sort of like the Princess Bride of the ancient world. It's a really great story. But what it tells us, though, is how very common this sort of idea of these mixed identities are in North Africa, that we have these stories that have...
I still do not know why she went through this. I am one of those who pushes the idea that Egypt was multi-ethnic and multicultural, that not monolithic when it comes to the ethnicity you would have there, and how would it be? The same for the rest of North Africa, really, because of its geographical location, because of its geolocation. The entire coast of North Africa is a conduit and a connection between the Mediterranean world, in the sense of Mediterranean Europe, and Africa and Asia. It connects all three. So yeah, you'll see Semitic people, you'll see black people, you'll see Europeans, you'll see all sorts of people. I kind of doubt that's what she's going to go into, though, because with all of this preamble, what I would say is, yeah, probably Carthage was multi-ethnic, although Levantine in origin, which means Hannibal was most likely Semitic. Is that where she's going?
People who are black and people who are not black interacting all the time. And there's a reality that they could, in fact, be related, and it's not a big deal. This is the world that Hannibal exists in, right? This is the world of the Nubians and the Kushites, of the Ethiopians and the kingdom of Aksum, of West African Ethiopians who are obviously black, of the Garamantes, who we don't know what they look like, of the people known as the Berbers, who also, again, this is not an actual ethnic category. It becomes one later because it can connect to the sort of linguistic categories, but it's actually up in the air what to be called a Berber actually means. And we
case by case
have this sort of stew pot of Phoenicians who have settled in these places, but they've integrated and mixed with people who are already there. And as we can go back to our Herodotus, right, black Africans are indigenous to North Africa. So we're going to have these mixed populations.
She's correct in the section where she talks about the fact that, yes, black populations did exist in North Africa in prehistorical time, in the ancient period, although already when we reach the ancient period in classical antiquity, by then it would have been extremely multicultural, and in fact quite a lot of black original people would have been pushed south. Because also to remember that the Sahara is not a barrier. Depending on what period we are looking, the Sahara would have not been a desert, so very much depends on what period you ask. But in the classical period, when the Greeks were settling in North Africa, when the Romans then conquered North Africa, by that time, particularly the populations of the Delta would have been majority non-black. And in fact, the majority of what we now identify as a black African man, so to someone who is from Western Africa, Central Africa, the Horn of Africa, the Kushites, the Ethiopian of an ancient classification, meaning a black man. Yeah, there would have been some in Egypt, absolutely, but they would have not constituted the totality of the population. And the higher percentages of black individuals, people that we today would call black, to use your language, Professor, would have lived in Upper Egypt, meaning the southern part. We know that because when the ancients talk about them, they tell us when within a North African army there is a contingent of people who are black, they underline it, which means the rest, as if they were all black, they wouldn't tell us, oh, this contingent is black. We have that. I can prove that with the sources. Also, we have mentions of cities where they tell us that the inhabitants of this village in North Africa or this town were black. Once again, if you underline that, it means that the rest weren't. And there are a lot of pointers, not to mention the paintings and the representations that clearly distinguish the average skin tone of an Egyptian, which would be olive, as opposed to the average skin tone of a Kushite, which would have been black. But then again, there were some black Egyptians too. They absolutely were part of the population. With that being said, as I say, no hatred towards this channel whatsoever, but I will be reviewing a few of their videos, as I was explaining, just from the point of academic neutrality and the true facts based on documented evidence alone. No politics, no propaganda. We are tired of that stuff, and we are ready to present the truth and extinguish all politically driven nonsense. Thank you so much for watching, number ones, and I'll see you next time. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.